The sun had barely begun to climb over the jagged horizon when the first hoofbeats echoed across the dry plains. Dust rose in thin clouds, swirling like ghosts over the cracked earth, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and distant fire. In the middle of that vast emptiness, a lone rider appeared, his silhouette sharp against the waking sky. His hat was pulled low, a shadow hiding his eyes, and the worn leather of his coat whispered against the saddle with every measured step. He was not here for peace. Every motion, every breath, carried the weight of purpose, a mission that could shatter lives and tilt the balance of a world no one outside this land could truly understand. In the heart of the Apache territory, life moved according to rhythms older than memory. Families rose with the sun, hunted, traded, and held the land sacred. The warrior, a figure both feared and revered among his people, watched the horizon from the edge of a cliff. His body was scarred from battles long past, and his eyes held the sharpness of a hawk tracking prey. He had saved his people countless times from outsiders, from rustlers, from the ones who thought the desert would bend to their greed. And yet, even with all the warnings the land offered, he could sense the shadow of a new danger creeping closer. A man of the plains, smooth with false charm, claiming allegiance to a cause no one could see. A spy disguised as a cowboy. The village below stirred as the first signs of tension rippled through the air. Children ran along narrow paths, unaware of the danger, their laughter light and brittle in the early morning. Elders leaned on carved staffs, eyes narrowing against the rising light. Even the wind seemed to carry a warning, brushing against the warrior's face like a cold finger of premonition. He had learned to trust instincts sharper than the keenest blade. And right now, his instincts told him that something wicked had arrived, something dressed as a friend, but with teeth hidden in the folds of polite conversation. The spy had ridden hard through the night, crossing canyons and dry riverbeds, keeping to hidden paths that would never show on a traveler's map. Every town he passed offered the same story. The land was harsh, the people unpredictable, and those who lived there would defend it with tooth and claw. He nodded silently, lips pressed tight, masking the fire of his true intentions. To outsiders, he appeared to be a wandering cowboy, a man of simple purpose seeking fortune or work. To the warrior, though, he was a shadow stretching over the land, a threat no one yet saw. And that was the cruelest part. The people would not believe him. They would not understand what was coming until it was too late. Inside the camp, the warrior moved quietly, checking the perimeter with practiced precision. Every movement was deliberate, measured, born from years of surviving against those who underestimated the desert and its people. His hand rested near the hilt of his knife, the steel gleaming faintly in the first light. The children's voices drifted behind him, unaware of the tension that clung to every rock and tree. Even the elders, seasoned in 1,000 stories of conflict, could not sense the danger that had already stepped across the line, invisible yet powerful. Only the warrior's instincts spoke with clarity, a warning he had long since learned to trust over the words of those around him. The spy's arrival did not go unnoticed for long. From a hidden ridge, his sharp eyes caught sight of the village. Smoke rose from cooking fires, the wind carrying scents of roasted meat and burning wood. He paused for a moment, studying the layout, noting the locations where sentries would stand, where the children played, where the elders held council. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could turn a mission that seemed certain into ruin. He adjusted his hat, leaned low over the horse's neck, and moved forward with silent determination. To him, the warrior was just one man among many, but one man could shift the balance if he could be broken without anyone realizing it. At the edge of the village, a sudden movement caught the warrior's attention. He froze, eyes scanning the horizon, body taut as wire. The wind whispered in his ear, carrying with it the faintest sound of hooves. The spy approached carefully, using the rising sun to mask his shadow, blending with the warmth and glare as if he belonged to the plains themselves. But the warrior's eyes, trained to read threats where others saw none, narrowed. Something about the man did not fit. A smile too practiced. A gait too deliberate. And beneath the calm exterior, a tension that could not be disguised. He knew in his bones that this was no ordinary traveler, no simple cowboy seeking work. This was a man sent to unravel the threads of their lives, to sow distrust and pain where none should exist. The village dogs growled faintly, sensing the stranger's intent long before the humans. Children clutched at their mothers' skirts, sensing the sharp edge of fear that crept like a shadow across the camp. The elders whispered among themselves, trying to explain away the unease, attributing it to the early morning chill or the restless winds. No one could see what the warrior saw, and that was the weight he carried alone. He knew that the people would not believe his warnings. They would laugh or shake their heads, trusting the appearances that hid the danger in plain sight. He alone understood the threat, and yet he could not act openly without risking chaos. The spy reached the edge of the village, his boots stirring up dust on the well-worn path. He tipped his hat to an old man tending the fire, speaking in low, polite tones. He asked questions about trade routes, about recent conflicts, about the state of the land. The villagers answered as best they could, polite yet wary. But the warrior watched from his hidden vantage, noting every pause, every flicker of hesitation. He had seen men like this before, men who carried lies so convincingly that even the cleverest could be fooled. And he knew that once the man gained trust, once he blended into the rhythms of the village, undoing the damage would be nearly impossible. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. The spy moved carefully, always observing, always calculating. He talked to traders, watched children at play, and lingered near the central fire where the elders gathered. Every word, every gesture, was a thread in a tapestry of deceit that only he could see. Yet the warrior did not move. He stayed hidden, watching and waiting, aware that to act too soon could reveal his own presence and force the spy to vanish before any proof could be gathered. The delicate balance between action and observation weighed heavily upon him, each second stretching like a taut rope over a canyon. By midday, the village had grown accustomed to the stranger's presence. He smiled, nodded, and offered help where it seemed needed. No one suspected the danger beneath the friendly exterior, and that ignorance was his greatest advantage. The warrior, from his concealed perch, felt the sting of frustration. He had warned his people countless times about outsiders who wore masks of civility. They had listened, or pretended to, but now the reality had arrived, cloaked in charm and false intentions. And when the consequences came, when the threads of trust were torn and the lives of the villagers threatened, no one would believe that he had tried to protect them. No one but the warrior would know the truth. Even as the spy mingled among them, the warrior's mind raced with possibilities. He considered traps, diversions, confrontations that could reveal the man's true purpose without endangering innocence. Yet every option carried risk, every movement a potential spark that could ignite violence too early. His people were untrained in deception of this scale. They trusted the world too easily. And he, scarred and battle-worn, bore the burden of knowledge that no one else could share. It was a lonely place to stand, a solitary watch in the midst of life moving forward with dangerous ignorance. The first sign of real trouble came when the spy approached a young boy tending the horses. His words were soft, almost fatherly, and his hands reached in gestures that promised nothing but guidance. But the warrior saw it for what it was, an attempt to insert influence, to test loyalty, to gather information that could later be used against them. A spark of anger ignited in his chest, hot and relentless. The instinct to act clashed with the need to remain hidden, and he realized that a single mistake could destroy the fragile safety of the village. Still, he could not look away. He could not ignore the threat that moved like a shadow across the open land. Night began to creep over the plains, long shadows stretching across the desert. The spy made his way to the edge of the village, eyes glinting with a strange calculation, and the warrior watched, silent and unseen. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of sage, smoke, and distant danger. The village slept lightly, unaware of the storm gathering at its gates. The warrior's hands rested on the hilt of his knife, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. He knew what had to be done, but he also knew the world was not ready for the truth. And when the morning came, when the spy would act, when the threads of deceit began to tighten, no one would believe what had been seen. No one would understand what had been attempted. Only the warrior would stand, scarred, vigilant, and alone, ready to face the consequences that no one else could yet imagine. The first night fell heavy and silent. Stars glittered coldly overhead, indifferent to the struggles below. Somewhere in the darkness, the spy moved among the sleeping villagers, his mind alive with plans and schemes, every step bringing him closer to ruin or triumph. The warrior remained hidden, senses alert, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. He could feel the weight of what was coming, a wave that would crash through lives like fire over dry grass. And he knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that when it did, no one would believe the story he could tell. No one would see the act of courage that might save them all. The land held its breath, the night waiting, and the first act of deception was ready to unfold, leaving the world teetering on the edge of chaos. The morning sun broke over the horizon in muted streaks of gold, brushing the desert with a light that was harsh and unyielding. The village stirred slowly, the smoke of last night's fire curling into the air and carrying with it the scent of cooked meat and damp earth. The warrior remained hidden, crouched behind a rise of jagged rock, watching every movement. His eyes, dark and unblinking, followed the spy as he went about the village's routines, blending into the daily rhythm like a shadow that refused to leave. Every glance the man gave, every nod he offered, seemed casual, yet the warrior's instinct screamed danger. He had seen this kind of deceit before, men sent to watch, to learn, to undermine. And he knew that the spy would not act recklessly. He would wait. He would plan. And when the time came, chaos would bloom where no one expected it. In the village, life pressed on despite the silent tension. Traders came and went, carrying goods from one camp to another. Children played in the dirt, their laughter a fragile shield against the dangers that lurked just beyond the fences. Elders whispered in low voices, recounting stories of battles long past, teaching the young ones caution and respect for the land. The warrior moved along the edge of the village, careful not to be seen. He checked the perimeter again, scanning for tracks that did not belong, listening for the faintest whisper of unnatural movement. Every detail mattered. Every choice could tip the scales toward disaster or survival. The spy, now fully aware of his surroundings, approached the main gathering circle where the elders convened. He spoke with an ease that belied the weight of his intentions, asking questions about the village's trade, about recent raids by outsiders, about the way the people handled disputes. He smiled often, his face calm, approachable, almost kind. The villagers nodded, offering answers without suspicion. But the warrior observed the subtle hints, the way the man's fingers flexed nervously when speaking of danger, the almost imperceptible flick of his eyes toward the young warriors training nearby, the tilt of his head when listening to the elders' tales. These were not mistakes. They were patterns. And the warrior understood them immediately. He remembered the first time he had sensed a spy in the region. Years ago, a man posing as a wandering prospector had crept into their lands, gathering information to hand over to outsiders eager for control. That man had thought he was clever, hiding his intentions beneath a skin of friendliness. But the warrior had seen through the mask, tracking every move, predicting every action. He had stopped the destruction then, though no one outside his circle had believed his warnings. The lesson was the same now. Appearances could deceive. Trust could be a weapon. and patience was the strongest tool in the face of an unseen enemy. By mid-morning, the spy had positioned himself near the water supply where the women and children came to draw from the stream. He engaged with casual conversation, asking about life, about weather, about the land itself. To the villagers, he seemed harmless, perhaps even friendly. But the warrior watched silently from the shadows, noting every subtle shift in posture, every carefully chosen word. The man was gathering knowledge, forming a map of the village in his mind. He studied routines, noted weaknesses, and memorized the placement of sentries. Everything he did was part of a plan that none of the villagers could see. And the warrior, knowing this, felt the tension coil tighter around his chest. He thought of the young boy he had seen near the horses yesterday. The boy had been eager, curious, full of life. The spy had approached him then, testing boundaries, measuring influence. That encounter had left a mark on the warrior's mind, a warning that the enemy sought not just to disrupt, but to infiltrate. The boy had returned to his chores unaware, but the warrior knew the seeds of deception had been sown. One act, one misstep, and the entire balance of the village could be shifted. The thought drove him to move closer, still hidden, closer to where he could intervene without revealing himself too soon. Hours stretched into the late afternoon. The sun climbed high, casting harsh shadows across the plains. The warrior's mind raced, considering all possibilities. He thought of traps he could set, diversions he could stage, ways to reveal the spy without putting the village in immediate danger. Every idea came with risk, every decision a potential spark that could ignite violence before he was ready. Yet he could not simply wait. The man's presence alone was enough to unsettle the fragile peace, enough to plant doubt in the hearts of those who trusted too easily. The villagers went about their day, largely unaware of the storm gathering at the edges of their world. Children chased one another through the dust, their laughter echoing against the hills. Women prepared meals and repaired clothing, tending to the small yet vital tasks that kept the community alive. Elders sat in the shade of acacia trees, discussing trade routes and the wisdom of the land, passing on lessons learned through hardship. They noticed the spy, of course, but saw only a polite stranger, a cowboy passing through their lives. They did not sense the danger beneath the calm exterior, nor could they imagine the intent hiding behind measured words and practiced gestures. As the afternoon wore on, the warrior moved again, circling closer to the main camp. He noted every small detail, the way the spy's hand brushed against the leather of his belt, the careful manner in which he observed the children, the almost imperceptible flinch when a hawk cried overhead. Each observation built a picture, a pattern, a warning that only the warrior could see. He knew that the man was patient, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to act. And he knew that when that moment came, the consequences could be devastating. By evening, the village had begun to settle down, the heat of the day giving way to a cooler breeze. Fires were lit for cooking, and the smell of roasting meat drifted across the camp. The spy moved among the villagers as naturally as if he belonged, helping where needed, offering advice in small, careful doses. To anyone else, he seemed harmless, even helpful. But the warrior, watching from the ridge, understood the danger in every action. The spy's movements were deliberate, designed to ingratiate himself with the people, to lull them into a false sense of security. And in that security lay the seed of destruction. The warrior thought of his own life, of the battles fought and the enemies faced. He had seen greed, betrayal, and cruelty in many forms. He had watched outsiders come and go, leaving pain and loss in their wake. But this man was different. This was not a raider, not a thief, not a brute. This was a man of cunning, a shadow that moved with purpose and precision. And that made him far more dangerous than any sword or gun. He was an enemy of the mind, a threat that could unravel the village without firing a single shot. Night fell, and with it came the quiet tension of the desert. Stars sparkled coldly overhead, distant and indifferent to the struggles below. The camp grew still, the firelight casting long, flickering shadows on the ground. The spy made his rounds, checking the village as if inspecting his own domain. He paused near the central fire, observing the elders, the children, the warriors who trained nearby. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and even in the dim light, they seemed to miss nothing. The warrior watched, silent and unseen, feeling the weight of the coming storm pressing down. Every instinct screamed that the night would bring action, that the balance of safety could shatter in an instant. From his hidden perch, the warrior recalled the stories of his people, tales of outsiders who had tried to manipulate and destroy. They had underestimated the strength of the land, the sharpness of the mind, the courage born of necessity. He knew that to fight this threat, he could not rely solely on strength or courage. He would need cunning, patience, and a deep understanding of the enemy's mind. And even then, victory was far from guaranteed. The spy was clever, and cleverness could not be rushed, could not be confronted with force alone. The firelight flickered as the villagers began to retire to their homes, the children's laughter fading, the sounds of the evening taking over. The spy moved among the shadows, his movement smooth and deliberate. He was careful not to reveal too much, careful not to act before the time was right. And in his quiet calculation, he did not notice the warrior, crouched and watching, every muscle ready, every sense alert. The first move had been made, the trap set in motion, and yet no one could see it. Only the warrior understood the danger that now enveloped them all. The night deepened, carrying with it a cold wind that whispered across the plains. The spy paused at the edge of the camp, looking back at the village he had infiltrated so carefully. He allowed himself a small smile, one born of satisfaction and anticipation. The pieces were in place. The plans, the observations, the quiet manipulations, all converging toward a moment that would change everything. And still, the people of the village slept, unaware of the danger that had crept into their midst. They trusted too easily, laughed too freely, and left themselves vulnerable to the shadow that moved among them. The warrior remained silent, watching, waiting for the night to reveal its secrets. His mind raced through possibilities, plotting countermeasures, preparing for actions that could save his people from disaster. He knew that the spy would not act recklessly. He would wait until the moment was perfect, until the balance had tipped just enough to maximize effect. And when that moment came, the warrior had to be ready. Yet he also knew the cruelest truth. No one would believe him. The act of courage, the warning, the subtle interventions, all would be invisible to the villagers who trusted appearances over instinct. The desert held its breath as the spy moved deeper into the camp, steps soft, deliberate, unseen by all but the one who watched from the shadows. Every instinct the warrior possessed screamed in warning. The plans of this man could unravel lives, destroy trust, and leave the village exposed to consequences that none of them could imagine. And yet, for all his knowledge, for all his foresight, the warrior remained alone in understanding. He had no one to share the burden, no one to confirm what he already knew. The spy had come with a mission, a shadow of deceit, and the warrior's job was to stop it without exposing himself too soon. It was a delicate balance, one that could break at any moment. As the night deepened and the first chill crept across the plains, the village slept uneasily, unaware of the storm gathering at its edge. The spy paused, listening to the soft breathing of the children, the rustle of tents, the faint crackle of the fire. He moved with purpose, every step calculated, and the warrior observed, heart pounding, knowing that the moment of truth was approaching. The land held its secrets, the stars watched silently, and the first real act of deception was about to unfold. And when it did, no one would believe what they had seen. No one except the warrior would understand the shadow that had crept into their lives, the danger that had arrived quietly, and the battle that had already begun beneath the calm surface of the desert night. The night lingered over the desert like a heavy cloak, thick with shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The warrior remained on the ridge, eyes unblinking, tracking the movements of the spy who now moved closer to the village's heart. The firelight from the central camp flickered, sending dancing shapes across the tents, illuminating faces that did not yet know the danger within reach. The warrior's hands itched toward the hilt of his knife, but he forced patience. Acting too soon would give the spy a chance to vanish or strike harder. Patience, he reminded himself, was the weapon of the unseen. Below, the spy leaned casually against a post near the water trough, watching the villagers with a quiet intensity. He spoke softly to a young woman drawing water, his voice calm and persuasive. His questions were simple, innocent even. Where the paths led, what dangers lay beyond the hills, who could be trusted? The woman smiled politely, answering as she always did for strangers, unaware that every word carried weight in the man's mind. He memorized patterns, routines, habits. Every step, every glance, every small gesture built a map of the village in his head, a map of influence, control, and opportunity. In the edge of the camp, two young warriors were practicing with their bows, their arrows thudding into the soft earth. They did not see the spy watching from the shadows, noting how their hands gripped the weapons, how they communicated silently with glances, how their reflexes could be exploited. The warrior below the ridge studied them as well, his mind cataloging possibilities. The children and young warriors were not threats yet, but in the wrong hands, even their trust could be twisted into danger. He imagined scenarios where the spy might manipulate a moment, provoke a mistake, or sow doubt that would ripple through the village like fire over dry grass. Meanwhile, the elders gathered near the largest tent, discussing trade and alliances with neighboring camps. One old man spoke of scouts lost in the hills. Another recalled the last time outsiders had come, bringing promises that ended in betrayal. The spy listened politely, nodding with understanding, but each story was carefully stored in his mind, filed as knowledge to use later. Even now, he seemed patient, harmless, friendly. But the warrior knew that patience masked strategy. The calm before a storm was often the deadliest of all. A sudden movement to the far side of the village drew the warrior's attention. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust in rhythmic pulses. The stranger wore a broad hat and rode fast, but there was something familiar in the gait, something that hinted at purpose. The warrior's eyes narrowed. Was this an ally, a scout from a neighboring village, or another piece of the larger puzzle that had brought the spy here? He shifted slightly, adjusting his perch, ready to move if the situation escalated. The desert had taught him long ago that a single arrival could change the balance of power in a heartbeat. Inside the village, a quiet tension began to build, though few could name it. Mothers watched their children with a closer eye, and even the youngest warriors felt an instinctive unease. The spy continued to weave himself into daily life, offering help with tasks, giving advice on water storage, sharing stories from the roads he claimed to have traveled. Every gesture seemed harmless, yet the warrior recognized the pattern. Influence was being inserted slowly, invisibly. Every friendly word, every small kindness, was a step toward undermining the people's trust in one another and in themselves. As night deepened, the spy moved to the edge of the tents where the elders slept, listening to conversations, memorizing habits, noting the placement of weapons and tools. His presence was unnoticed, his movements like a shadow passing silently between the flickering lights. And in that quiet observation, the danger grew. One careless moment, one subtle change, could shift the village from calm to chaos without anyone realizing until it was too late. The warrior remained perched, muscles coiled, aware that he carried a burden that no one else could see or share. In a smaller subplot, a young woman, skilled in tracking and gathering herbs, had noticed something odd. She had glimpsed the stranger's hand lingering too long near a knife, the way his eyes followed certain villagers with more than casual interest. She could not fully articulate her fear, but her instincts were sharp, shaped by years of watching the land and reading its signs. That evening, she approached the warrior quietly, sharing her unease without revealing too much. The warrior listened, nodding slightly, grateful for the warning yet aware that her presence added another layer of complication. Now, the network of perception stretched wider, encompassing instincts and observations that the spy had not yet accounted for. Elsewhere, a trader passing through the area noticed the stranger asking questions that seemed odd, probing for information that went beyond simple curiosity. The trader kept his distance, wary of confrontation, but he filed the details away in his mind. Rumors spread quietly, whispered from one passerby to another, adding subtle ripples of tension. The spy, ever cautious, noted these small reactions, calculating how they might be manipulated or ignored. Every encounter, every observation, fed into his larger plan, and he was patient. Too much haste could undo everything. Back on the ridge, the warrior considered the coming challenges. The spy was clever, patient, and skilled in deception. Acting openly could expose the villagers to immediate danger, yet doing nothing allowed the enemy to grow stronger unseen. He weighed every option, imagining ways to intercept the spy, ways to protect the children and elders, ways to use the village itself as a shield without revealing his hand too soon. The tension was a living thing, coiling and uncoiling, twisting through every stone and tree, through every shadow that crossed the camp. The spy, sensing only calm from the outside, continued his subtle campaign. He mingled with the young warriors, asking questions about training, about patrols, about the lands beyond the village. He lingered near the water, observing the way the villagers interacted, noting loyalties and alliances. To any outsider, he seemed nothing more than a polite traveler, a cowboy passing through with an interest in local life. But the warrior saw through the mask, tracking each movement with the precision of a hawk. He knew that the spy's patience was not indifference but strategy, that the real danger lay in what had not yet happened. Meanwhile, another subplot unfolded as the young tracker decided to follow the spy covertly, hoping to discover more about his intentions. She moved like a shadow, slipping through brush and behind rocks, observing without being seen. Her presence added an unseen layer of complexity. The spy, unaware, continued to catalog the village's patterns, unaware that he himself was being watched. The warrior noted her movements and adjusted his own plan accordingly, grateful for the unseen support yet cautious about revealing too much. The web of observation and counter-observation grew, tension winding tighter with every silent step. The night deepened, bringing with it a cold that crept under the blankets and through the tents. Fires burned low, casting long, uncertain shadows. In the dark, the spy paused near the central fire, calculating his next move. He knew that the night offered opportunity, that the villagers' lowered guard could be exploited. Yet he remained cautious, aware that patience was as crucial as action. Every word, every gesture, every small interaction was part of a larger pattern, a careful plan that could either succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. The warrior's eyes never left him. He observed, anticipating, considering every possibility. The danger was no longer abstract. It was tangible, moving among the tents and shadows, shaping events that no one else could perceive. The village slept lightly, unaware that the balance of their lives rested on one man's vigilance. Every instinct, every experience, every scar told the warrior that the coming hours could determine the fate of everyone under the desert sky. As midnight approached, a sudden sound drew attention. A twig snapped somewhere along the edge of the village, far from the spy, but enough to startle both the warrior and the young tracker. She froze, breath held, eyes scanning the darkness. The warrior remained still, heart pounding, knowing that the desert had its own ways of signaling danger, that even small disturbances could herald much larger threats. He waited, muscles tight, senses alert, aware that every movement in the night carried meaning. The spy, moving cautiously toward the tents, paused when he sensed the shift in the air. The subtle tension, the shift of wind, the faint rustle that did not belong all suggested that he was not alone. For a moment, he studied the shadows, eyes sharp, reading the night for threats he could not yet see. Patience remained his shield, calculation his weapon. He could not act yet, could not reveal his hand, could not risk an early mistake that would undo weeks of careful planning. From his vantage, the warrior felt the threat of danger tighten. He considered every possibility, imagining how the spy might act, what methods he might use to undermine the village, what traps he might lay without detection. Every choice required subtlety, every intervention needed to be measured. The young tracker's presence, the trader's whispers, the movements of the children and elders all formed a complex web of potential outcomes, any one of which could lead to disaster if handled incorrectly. The desert was quiet now, the night pressing close, yet alive with tension. Stars glimmered above, indifferent witnesses to the unfolding events. The spy remained patient, the warrior vigilant, and the village unsuspecting. The strands of observation, suspicion, and strategy wound tighter, every movement building toward an unseen climax. The young tracker's eyes never left the stranger, noting each gesture, each word, each small sign of intent. In that tense stillness, the first subtle shifts of conflict were already moving. Trust was being tested, instincts sharpened, alliances considered. Every character held a part of the unfolding story, and every action, however small, could ripple into consequences none of them yet understood. The spy's purpose, the warrior's vigilance, and the villager's obliviousness formed a fragile triangle of suspense. And as the night pressed on, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move that could set everything in motion, a moment when the balance of lives, trust, and survival would finally begin to tilt. The warrior tightened his grip on the knife, the young tracker shifted silently behind him, and the spy, calm and calculating, continued to weave his invisible influence. The stage was set, the tension wound taut, and the first true confrontation, seen or unseen, loomed just beyond the horizon, ready to strike without warning, leaving no one untouched. The desert night grew heavier, the wind carrying a cold bite that seemed to seep into bones. The village slept uneasily under a sky of countless stars, unaware of the invisible web tightening around them. From his perch on the ridge, the warrior observed every flicker of movement, every whisper of shadow, and felt the tension coil tighter with each passing minute. The spy had grown bolder, moving closer to the heart of the camp, his steps measured, his gestures deliberate. The man's patience was a weapon, his calmness a shield. But the warrior, scarred and battle-worn, had learned to read the quiet before storms, and this one was coming. Near the central fire, the spy knelt, pretending to arrange logs for the night, his eyes scanning the tents as if casual. Every glance carried meaning, every subtle adjustment revealed careful calculation. He noted where weapons were kept, how the children slept, how the elders positioned themselves for protection. None suspected the danger. The villagers had accepted him, welcomed him even, unaware that the slightest manipulation could unravel everything they held dear. To the outside eye, he was just another traveler, another friendly face in the harsh landscape. To the warrior, he was a shadow of destruction waiting to strike, a spider spinning a web over lives that did not yet know they were caught. The young tracker moved silently behind a line of rocks, her eyes sharp and attentive. Every movement of the spy was catalogued, every subtle gesture noted. She had learned to read the land as one reads a story. The angle of a shadow, the shift in the wind, the way a man's fingers lingered on a surface. She had shared warnings with the warrior, who nodded but remained careful not to act too soon. Patience had always been the strongest defense, and now it was a test of endurance, of timing, of trust and instinct. Both watched, silent and unseen, as the spy moved through the sleeping village like a predator cloaked in civility. From the ridge, the warrior could see the children playing nearby, unaware of the threat inching closer. Their laughter, though faint in the night, struck a chord of urgency in his chest. Every instinct screamed for action, but he held himself back, knowing that a wrong step could expose his position and force the spy into immediate retaliation. He studied the man's patterns, anticipating what might come next, imagining scenarios that twisted and turned like dry riverbeds after a sudden rain. He had seen cunning men before, but this one had patience matched by calculation. The danger was not in brute force. It was in the quiet, relentless weaving of influence that could destroy trust before the first act of violence. The spy paused near the largest tent, listening as an elder recounted the stories of the land, stories of past battles, of men who had come and gone with promises that left ruin behind. He nodded politely, feigning interest, but every word was absorbed with precision. Each tale became a thread in his mental map, a clue to weaknesses, patterns, and potential leverage. The warrior felt the weight of this quiet strategy pressing down. No one in the village saw it yet, and that made the threat even more dangerous. Ignorance, he knew, was the enemy of survival. Suddenly, a small fire flickered near the edge of the camp where the young warriors trained. One of them had spotted a movement, a shadow that didn't belong. The spy, still calm, had noted the same shift and adjusted his stance slightly, as if acknowledging the watcher without giving himself away. The young tracker noticed too, crouched behind the rocks, breath shallow, muscles tense. The threads of observation had begun to overlap, the spy unaware that his careful manipulation was now being mirrored by unseen eyes. The tension surged, thick and electric, as every step carried potential consequences. The wind shifted, sweeping across the ridge where the warrior watched. He caught a faint scent, the dry tang of dust and leather, and knew that the spy's patience might be nearing its limit. The man was close to making a move, testing the waters before acting. The warrior's fingers tightened around the knife hilt, his body coiled like a spring ready to uncoil. Every plan, every precaution, every silent warning had led to this moment. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first act to ignite the chain of events that had been quietly building. Down in the village, small signs of unease began to ripple outward. A child stumbled near the water, a dog growled at an unseen scent, and a trader whispered cautiously to another about the stranger's questions. None of these moments were alarming in isolation, yet together they formed a pulse of tension that echoed through the camp. The spy noted them, calculating how each ripple could be used, anticipating reactions, measuring influence. He moved with the grace of someone who knows time is his ally, waiting for the precise instant when the pieces align perfectly. Meanwhile, the warrior shifted slightly, repositioning to gain a better view of the central fire. He considered what would happen if the spy acted now, if he tried to manipulate the children or strike at the center of the village. Every possibility carried risk. One wrong move, one misjudgment, and the balance would tip into chaos. The young tracker, aware of his thoughts, moved silently along a parallel path, a shadow within a shadow, ready to intervene if needed. Together, they formed an unseen network of observation, a silent resistance against a threat the villagers could not yet name. The spy approached the children who had been playing earlier, kneeling slightly as if to speak softly to one of them. His voice was calm, soothing, almost gentle. But the warrior knew the intent behind the gestures, subtle testing, gauging trust, planting seeds of doubt. He imagined the potential consequences if the villagers misinterpreted his actions, if fear or suspicion took root in their hearts. The night was alive with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. Every flicker of firelight, every whisper of wind, every rustle of tents contributed to the mounting tension, building a stage where trust and deception would collide. In a smaller subplot, one of the elders had noticed something strange in the way the stranger interacted with the villagers. He had seen his own grandchildren near the central fire, had observed the polite way the stranger lingered near the weapons, near the water supply. Though he could not articulate a clear threat, a cold unease settled over him. He moved quietly, passing a word to a trusted friend, a signal that something was amiss. The warning was subtle, almost invisible, yet it added another layer to the complex web of observation and suspicion. By midnight, the spy had positioned himself at the very edge of the central camp, close enough to observe without drawing attention. The warrior watched, muscles coiled, heart steady despite the rising pressure. The night had become a battleground of shadows, patience, and anticipation. Every participant, the spy, the warrior, the young tracker, even the villagers unaware of the danger, was part of an intricate dance where one misstep could trigger disaster. The air itself seemed charged, each movement weighted with significance, each breath a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. The spy's eyes flicked toward the ridge once, faintly, almost imperceptibly. He sensed the watcher but could not pinpoint him. His mind raced with calculations, possibilities, contingencies. He adjusted his stance slightly, a small maneuver to maintain his advantage without revealing awareness. The warrior tightened his grip on the knife again, aware that the moment was near. Every instinct, every story etched into his memory, every pattern of observation had led to this hour. The spy had been patient, calculating, but even patience had limits. And the night seemed poised to erupt into the first true act of confrontation. Elsewhere, the young tracker crept closer to the fire, eyes locked on the spy's movements. She had observed his subtle manipulations, catalogued his gestures, and now she prepared to intervene if the situation demanded. Her pulse raced with anticipation, every muscle ready, every breath held in careful rhythm. She had not been trained for a confrontation of this scale, yet instinct guided her, sharpened by years of reading the land and its hidden signals. She was part of the web now, part of the unseen force working against the spy's influence. The children, oblivious to the tension around them, moved closer to the central fire, their laughter muted by fatigue. The villagers slept lightly, dreams undisturbed yet fragile. The spy's hand lingered near the edge of a tent where a small supply of tools and weapons rested, a subtle test of attention, a minor intrusion to gauge awareness. The warrior's eyes followed every motion, noting the precision, the timing, the intent. He knew that the first strike would not come from a gun or blade, but from subtle manipulation, a seed planted to be nurtured into chaos. The night stretched on, long and taut with anticipation. Every heartbeat in the village seemed to echo in the warrior's mind, a drumbeat of rising tension. The spy moved with almost invisible grace, blending into the camp, calculating, waiting. The young tracker shifted silently behind rocks, a shadow mirroring the hidden strength of vigilance. Every small detail mattered now, every moment a thread in a tapestry of potential conflict. The wind carried faint sounds of movement from the ridge, the rustle of leaves and brush, the whisper of the desert night. The warrior leaned slightly forward, focusing on the spy, reading his gestures, imagining every potential outcome. One step, one word, one misinterpreted signal could ignite the chain of events that had been building for days. The tension was unbearable yet precise, a taut wire stretched over a canyon ready to snap at the slightest touch. In the midst of it all, a small incident stirred unease. One of the children dropped a tool near the fire, the clatter echoing sharply in the stillness. The spy's head snapped toward the sound, eyes calculating, hands steady, posture unchanged. The warrior's muscles tensed. The night held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The threads of observation, trust, deception, and instinct were wound as tight as they could go. Every participant in this silent war, the spy, the warrior, the young tracker, even the oblivious villagers, was on the edge of change. The desert seemed to lean closer, listening, observing, carrying the weight of the moment. And as the minutes stretched, the first signs of an approaching climax shimmered in the air, a tension so dense it could almost be cut with a knife. The spy was patient, the warrior vigilant, the tracker alert, and the village unaware, teetering on the edge of discovery. No one spoke, no one moved more than necessary. The night held its breath. And somewhere in the darkness, the first spark of confrontation, small, subtle, and almost invisible, was about to ignite a chain of events that could change everything. The story had reached its peak of tension, every shadow, every movement, every breath loaded with the promise of action, the certainty of revelation, and the suspense of an ending yet unseen. The night air cracked with tension, every shadow alive with anticipation. The spy had moved closer to the heart of the village, every step measured, every gesture calculated, yet unaware that he had been surrounded by more eyes than he realized. The warrior crouched in the rocks above, muscles coiled, ready to act. The young tracker shadowed the movement from another vantage point, silent, her breath shallow, eyes fixed. It was a standoff of patience and observation, a silent duel that had been building for days. And in that moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. The spy knelt near the central fire, reaching subtly toward the scattered tools and weapons, testing for signs of attention. He paused as a small figure stepped from the shadows. The child who had dropped the tool earlier now stood frozen, eyes wide, sensing the weight of the moment without understanding it fully. The warrior caught the movement immediately, leaning forward to prepare for intervention. But instead of rushing in, he studied the spy's reaction. The man's eyes flickered, a brief shadow of surprise, and in that instant, the warrior saw the hesitation, the doubt creeping in. Patience, it seemed, had begun to work in the village's favor. The young tracker made her presence known with a soft, deliberate step that caught the spy's attention. He looked up, finally realizing he had been watched, and for the first time, the calm mask cracked slightly. The warrior used the moment, moving swiftly down the ridge in a silent glide, his knife ready but not yet raised. The spy, sensing the sudden attention from multiple directions, faltered, uncertainty replacing the confidence that had guided him through the camp for days. The elders, who had been awakened by a faint disturbance, now emerged from their tents, their eyes narrowing as they took in the scene. The children were corralled safely behind them, curiosity mixing with fear. The spy tried to speak, to charm, to convince them of harmless intentions, but the weight of observation from the warrior and the tracker left him no room for deception. Every calculated move was met with caution, every subtle gesture countered by vigilance. For the first time, he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had not anticipated. The warrior stepped fully into the camp, positioning himself between the spy and the villagers. His presence was calm but commanding, the authority of experience radiating from him. The spy raised his hand slightly, a gesture of surrender, and in the still desert air it was clear that the game had shifted. The tension that had built for days hung thick, but the balance had finally tilted. Patience, observation, and quiet courage had triumphed over deceit. The elders spoke softly, asking questions, seeking answers about the man who had infiltrated their camp. The spy hesitated, realizing that persuasion would not work against minds strengthened by vigilance and instinct. Slowly, he admitted his purpose, explaining that he had been sent to gather information, to test the village's defenses, but that he had never intended to harm anyone directly. The villagers listened carefully, relief mingling with the lingering wariness. The children, now safely close to their parents, looked on with wide eyes, sensing the resolution without understanding the full complexity. The warrior, though still alert, allowed himself a small nod. The danger had passed, the immediate threat contained without violence, and the village had been protected. He reflected on the lessons of patience, the importance of observation, and the quiet power of vigilance. The young tracker stepped forward, receiving a silent nod of approval from the warrior. Together, they had ensured safety without bloodshed, proving that courage and insight could outmatch cunning and deceit. In the calm that followed, the villagers began to restore normalcy. The firelight danced once more over the tents, now casting only shadows of safety and relief. The elders spoke quietly with the warrior and the tracker, discussing what had occurred and sharing wisdom with the younger generation. The spy, now stripped of his pretense, was allowed to leave the village. His mission ended not with triumph but with understanding. He had underestimated the strength of community, the power of vigilance, and the sharp insight of those who refused to be fooled by appearances. A sense of gratitude spread through the village. The children laughed softly once again, this time with ease, and the adults resumed their routines with a renewed appreciation for the quiet acts that protect life and trust. The young tracker received small nods of approval, her courage and instinct recognized by those around her. The warrior, though ever watchful, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The village was safe, the deception uncovered, and the lessons of patience, vigilance, and community had been reinforced in the most tangible way. In the days that followed, life returned to its rhythm, slower and steadier, but enriched by the knowledge of what had passed. The villagers spoke quietly of the spy, of the warrior's courage, and the young tracker's sharp eyes. Tales of patience, quiet strength, and careful observation were shared, ensuring that lessons learned would guide them in the future. Every glance, every step, every decision became a part of their collective memory, strengthening bonds and reinforcing the importance of vigilance without fear. The spy, walking alone back toward the open plains, carried with him a humbling understanding of his own limits. He had planned and calculated, yet he had been outmatched not by force but by insight, caution, and the quiet courage of those who saw beyond appearances. The desert stretched before him, vast and unyielding, a reminder that even the cleverest plans could falter when confronted by patience and awareness. Meanwhile, the warrior returned to his perch overlooking the village, watching the morning sun stretch across the horizon. He felt the weight of responsibility ease slightly, the tension that had coiled through nights now dissipating. The village was alive and safe, the children playing freely, the elders speaking in calm voices, the young tracker moving with quiet pride among her people. The threat had passed, and the land itself seemed to breathe in relief alongside them. The young tracker approached the warrior quietly, offering a small smile that reflected pride, courage, and relief. Together they surveyed the village below, noting the subtle ways life had resumed its natural rhythm. The fire pits were tended, the livestock checked, and the sounds of normalcy footsteps on dry earth, laughter, conversation filled the air. The warrior placed a hand lightly on the tracker's shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, and shared triumph. In the distance, the plains stretched endlessly, carrying the promise of future challenges, but also the reassurance that courage, patience, and vigilance would always hold their place. The village had endured, strengthened by experience, and the lessons of the spy's visit had left an indelible mark. Trust had been tested, vigilance had prevailed, and the quiet power of observation had turned potential chaos into safety. As the day advanced, the villagers moved with a renewed sense of unity. The children ran through the open spaces, playing with laughter that no longer carried the tension of the previous nights. The elders shared stories once again, this time highlighting the importance of wisdom, attentiveness, and courage in the face of hidden threats. The young tracker's role was quietly acknowledged, her instincts and bravery woven into the fabric of the community's collective memory. The spy, now a figure in the past, had been humbled but not destroyed. He carried with him a lesson about the limits of deception against those who see beyond appearances, a lesson about the quiet power of insight and the strength of vigilance. He rode off into the desert, his steps careful, his mind heavier with understanding. The warrior and the young tracker watched him disappear over the horizon, knowing that the village's safety had been preserved, that trust had survived, and that vigilance had proven stronger than manipulation. In the following days, the village returned fully to its routines. Trade continued, children played freely, and the elders resumed their lessons in cautious wisdom. Stories of the spy's arrival and the subsequent vigilance spread quietly among the villagers, reinforcing the importance of awareness, patience, and the courage to act when danger is sensed. The warrior remained present but calm, a guardian of both safety and lesson, his eyes always attentive, his instincts always ready. The young tracker, once a shadow in the night, now moved openly among the villagers with respect and recognition. Her courage, awareness, and skill had not only protected the community, but had strengthened it. She had proven that bravery need not be loud, that observation could be as powerful as action, and that vigilance, when guided by insight, could turn potential disaster into security. The desert, harsh and unyielding, continued its eternal rhythm, a reminder of the challenges that lay beyond the village. But within its bounds, life had found a balance. The villagers moved with confidence, guided by experience, protected by vigilance, and bonded by shared understanding. The lessons of patience, courage, and quiet observation would carry them forward, ready for whatever the vast plains might bring. And so, the village thrived. The spy was gone, his influence nullified, but the story of his presence remained as a testament to the power of insight and courage. The warrior and the young tracker became quiet legends among their people, not for violence or conquest, but for the subtle, steadfast acts that ensured safety, preserved trust, and nurtured hope. The sun rose higher each day, casting warm light over a village that had faced deception and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. In the end, it was the quiet vigilance of those who saw beyond appearances that brought peace. The villagers learned that courage is not always loud, that strength is not always physical, and that observation, patience, and careful action can protect life and nurture trust even against the most subtle and patient of enemies. And in the golden light of morning, with the desert stretching endlessly around them, the village smiled, children laughed, and life went on. A living proof that even in a world of shadows, clarity, courage, and vigilance could guide them toward a safe and hopeful future.